Coming up on this episode of Tom Talks Rubbish.
I think my lack of time during the day saves me from burnout. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Where I don't have enough time to read as much as I want to, and I don't have enough time to watch as much wrestling as I want to. So what I do consume is more precious to me. And I think that helps me avoid the burnout. I feel like if I had all the time I wanted to do this stuff, I would get burned out immediately. Like if I was watching wrestling constantly or reading constantly, I would probably get burned out after a couple of days. But, like I'm a big boy, so like the fact that like I have to set aside these moments to do these things keeps me from getting turned off by them.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talks and stand back for another interview. This time, I'm joined by the one and only Rich from the Map Men podcast and Beyond the Bell. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be back again, Tom. I really appreciate it, man. I'm excited. Let's go.
Yeah, we had a
I'm
great,
excited about the new format.
yeah, we had a great time last time, dude, and I'm really excited to chat with you
Yeah.
again. But for the good people that may not know, because I don't think I was asking this question when I had you on in the early days,
hmm
where do you first discover wrestling as an overall fan?
Whew. All right. So, okay. I'll preface my answer with this. I am 43 years old and I grew up in New
Okay.
York City, right? That being said, all we got growing up was WWF, right? Like
Mhm.
we never were exposed to NWA or WCW in its infancy or anything like that, right? It was all WWF. So when I was a kid, and we also didn't have cable TV as a kid, right? So when I was
Mm.
a kid, my first exposure was Superstars, WWF Superstars every Saturday morning, right? And you saw everybody there. Everybody who was a star in the 80s and early 90s was on that TV show, and I used to watch it every Saturday with my dad. Now, I would say like flash forward a few years, again, still didn't have cable, but I believe on channel two, three, or four at night on Saturday nights there was a WCW program which I tried to keep up with. But I don't know about you, when I was a kid, I preferred WWF because it was so over the top and cartoony,
Mm.
as opposed to like that more realistic NWA, WCW Southern American style of wrestling, you know?
I understand what you're saying completely there.
hmm
To be honest, and I'm going to out myself as a baby here, but like I'm not someone that can comment on things like that because
hmm
like I didn't start watching wrestling until 2009. It's been documented on my channel before, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah.
So when you do discover it though, are
hmm
you someone that's like when it comes to the WWF, are you someone that's like, I'm not just gonna watch the shows, I'm gonna get all the not yeah, toys, I'm gonna get every accessory that I can. And wrestling becomes my life sort of thing.
In a, ooh, that's an interesting question. So I would say at when as a child, I do remember like the rock and roll wrestling connection stuff, right?
Mm,
So it was like that WWF crossover with like Cyndi Lauper and like like Mr. T, Liberace, like all those stars. And I my folks didn't have a lot of money growing up, so like it was very like pick and choose what you want. And I remember when I was a
mm,
kid, my favorite thing was they were called I think they were called Thumb Warriors, right?
mm.
And they were little plastic hollow wrestlers, right? And I had a Hulk Hogan and a Nikolai Volkov, right? And
Oh,
you put them, they had like holes in their back and like their lower back, and you put your thumb in there, and then you could like thumb wrestle somebody with them, you know? So those
yeah,
were super fun. And I remember getting those, and I remember friends of mine as kids had these LJN like stretchy big wrestlers. They were like 10, 12 inches. Very cool, like, Big John Studd, like Andre the Giant, like all these guys floating around. And then as I got a little older, I started getting the WWF figures that had
yeah.
like moves. They were like they didn't do anything, but like that like Shawn Michaels had like it was like rocker Shawn Michaels, for example. And I think he had like his legs were stuck together and you pressed his back and he did like a jump. You
Mm.
know, there was like he was like
Was
he
it
had like a
like the kip up that he does? Was it like that or
no, it was like it was like a small figure about this big, and then his I remember his hands were out like this, and you could only move his arms up and down, and then you press his back, and he did like a jump, like a
ah,
jump up, you know. And I think Marty Jannetty did the same thing, you know. But yeah, like those toys I remember very fondly.
you brought up the Rockers there, and we
Hmm.
all have those big moments in wrestling that we remember that sit in
Yeah.
our brains, whether it be, as I said, the Rockers break up,
Hmm.
things like that. So, what's the big moment for you, Rich, that you're like, that's the moment that when I think of wrestling, I think of that from my childhood?
Ooh, as a kid or okay, yeah, as a kid, right? Hmm.
Mm,
That's up there. It's definitely up there. There's a weird one that I always think of, and I think I'm not sure how old I was. I may have been like 9 or 10, but there was a Survivor Series, and I can't remember who was on what side. But what I do remember was Undertaker was the last man on one of the teams,
mm.
right?
This isn't
And
his debut, is it?
no. This wasn't his
Ah,
debut. It was like a year later or 2 years later. He was still like kind of like the zombie Undertaker. But I
mm,
remember like one specific year, I remember watching I would stand up because our TV was like high on
mm.
like a platform. So I would always stand up and watch TV, you know, just because like I was an excitable kid. I'm also an excitable adult, but you know, I would stand up and watch TV, and I remember like it was like the number five of whatever team it was the Undertaker, and the Undertaker opened his jacket. The way he said yes was he opened his jacket. I think it may have been Team America. He opened his jacket and he had an American flag lining in his
Oh,
jacket,
no.
which signified yes. You know, so for years, I thought this was a fever dream until I found it like more as an adult, you know, like when you start tape trading or you get like
Mm.
like pre WWE network stuff, you know. But that was like I remember that moment like so vividly. It's like just painted across my brain.
What's that moment like then for you? Because
Yeah.
we all have our wrestling, what we think are, in your own words,
Yeah.
fever dreams. So what's that moment like for you then when you're like, yes, it was actually real, like sort of thing?
Oh yeah, I forget. I remember the feeling I had when I was a kid. I remember thinking like because it was Team America, right? And I
Yeah.
remember thinking like the Undertaker's not American, he's a zombie. You
Mm.
know, like he's an undead cowboy. Why would he say yes? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, he did it, you know? And as an adult, finding that tape again, or finding that moment, and then hearing him talk about it, I forgot what podcast it was, but he mentioned that he immediately got rid of that jacket because they wanted him to wear it constantly. And he was
Mm.
like, he's like, I thought it was stupid. And he just like left it somewhere, you know, and was like, oh, I lost it.
I love that story. So
Oh, yeah.
what about as your age changes? Are you someone that maybe had a break from wrestling before where we are now, sort of thing?
Yeah, you know, like those, I would say like the year before the pipe bomb
Mm.
was probably like my break from wrestling where I was still recording it. I was still like DVRing it or whatever. And I just remember like not really being entertained by it, you know, and there was like a big lull because it was just WWE for a while, you know. Um, and at that time I was still watching like All Japan, um, you know, some international stuff, but I wasn't like I didn't have like like the fever kind of died down a little bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. So,
Yeah.
what was it? Because we've gone from sort of the 80s
Mhm.
to 2010. So, I've skipped over a bit, and that's just how my interviews go. I do
Yeah, yeah.
apologize. What
No.
was it that kept you sort of in wrestling till about 2010, early 2011, then, Rich?
Force of habit, a lot of force of habit. You know, like I really enjoyed a lot of what was going on at the time, and like I said, like I hyper focus on things I like, so
Mm,
I would never be like I'm never watching this again, but I
mm,
would have it on in the periphery or in the background, or I would still, you know, record it on, I think at that time it may have been a TiVo.
Oh yeah.
Um, so like it would always just be there, like I would never abandon it. It would just be like, and I'd always have jokes with my friends of like, they'd always be like, it's never gonna be, Monday Night Raw is never gonna be good again.
Mm.
And I'd be like, oh, well, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels apologize to each other. You know what I mean?
What was the moment for you? What are some raw moments then that you're like that you can point at to your friends and be like, "See, this was good," sort of thing?
I really enjoyed this is this is a weird one too. I think it may have been it was early 2000s and it was the unmasking of Kane.
Oh yeah.
Where like he was all like fucked up and he had like the smoke eyes and everything. I remember that and being like, come on, this you can't deny that this is a good moment.
Why did the unmasking of Kane speak to you as a fan?
I was a big Kane fan. Like I always loved it when Kane would just show up and clean house, so to speak. And then just like that storyline kind of going forward with like the feud he was in, he was like all gnarly and stuff, and like I didn't expect them. I think it was in my early 20s when that happened. I didn't expect them to pull that trigger of well, they unmasked him, and then it's like they made it like a wig that night. They made his long hair a wig, and then when they took it off, he was like his hair was all messed up. He had like that haircut that was like kind of started at the top half of his head. It was very gnarly.
Hmm. I understand what you're saying completely there. So what is it then? We talked about it a little bit,
Yeah.
like force of habit, but was there a particular story that you're like, I hang my hat on this, and this is why I've been a wrestling fan for so long?
Like in of the entirety of my wrestling fandom.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh, that's hard. That's a hard question. I can like I rem- I feel like I've forgotten more about wrestling than I've watched. If that makes sense. Like I've
Mhm.
been watching since I was a kid. I'm in my 40s. I've forgotten so much stuff that I liked, but I would think like as far as storytelling goes, I vividly remember um Macho Man Jake the Snake. I feel like that would make me a wrestling fan forever. Where Macho Man ends up getting bitten by the snake. Um, there's a lot of famous stories that go with that. I remember, like the Bret Hart Shawn Michaels stuff was always like some of my favorite stuff to watch. Not so much the screw job, but like everything else. Like the screw job,
Mm.
I feel like was talked about ad nauseum, but everything else between those guys was always so fantastic to me. And like, especially during that time of WWF, where it was you got a lot of gimmicky characters. I
Mm.
feel like the company didn't really have a certain direction they wanted to go in, but they had Shawn Michaels. And I think like that trajectory always hooked me as a fan. And when he made his return too, like I was just like in that guy's corner forever, if that makes sense.
What about when he made his return in 2018 in Saudi Arabia?
I'm not acknowledging that return again, but I will say I remember watching that and being like, he's still outperforming everybody in that ring,
Oh yeah.
even though that match was not great.
Could that match have been great though, do you think? Or was it sort of the thing where they were set up to fail? Or was it just that they were I think this is a phrase, a victim of circumstance?
I think they're a victim of circumstance. I think all those guys made a lot of money. I think they probably don't have a problem with it. But I also know that, that's a hard travel day, to go from the States to Saudi Arabia, deal with the culture shock, deal with the flight time, deal with whatever hotel and food and like all that stuff you're doing, and then have to go out there and perform is, it's a big ask. And I think maybe that's what I'd like to, as a fan, I'd like to say like, oh, maybe that's what happened and that's what caught up to them. But
Mm.
like, and these guys at that point were, what year was that?
2018, 28?
2018. All right, let's say
I think
2018.
someone will correct me in the comments, but I think it's 2018.
Listen, these guys were also a little bit older, so maybe age and travel definitely probably had something to do with it. I do think there could have been a chance for that match to be effing fantastic, and Triple H got hurt in that match too, right? Like he tore his pec. I think everybody got hurt except for Shawn Michaels, right?
I don't know about hurt, but Kane's
Okay.
mask fell off.
Yeah.
I think Sean got hurt as well because
Okay.
he did the moonsault
Hmm.
onto. He tried to do a moonsault onto Kane and Undertaker, and he just
Uh,
landed on his head. I don't know if you
yeah.
remember that.
Yeah. It was kind of like a little bit, it turned into like a little bit of a botch fest, right?
Oh god, yeah, god, yeah. But
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
why I asked you about it
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah. I think, listen, age, circumstance, travel. I'll give those four guys all the excuses on the planet just because they're such high level performers, you know. And also, like, I'm a huge Shawn Michaels fan.
we'll get into because again, I
Hmm.
don't believe we were doing this segment last time I had you on, but later we will do a round of something
Great,
called generic wrestling questions.
sure.
Anyway, so then, Rich, how does your crazy podcasting journey with the great man that is Andrew Zarian start?
Oh, me and Andrew have known each other since we were like 13. And you know, we've known each other for such a long time. And then at one point, he had his GFQ network, which is the network that all our podcasts are on, basically,
Mm,
except for Beyond the Bell. Beyond the Bell's on Fightful. But, you know, we've known each other for such a long time. I was doing a different comic book podcast with another friend of ours for him for the network. And then, you know, he would produce it. So he'd be sitting in the room with us. And then every episode after we were done, he'd be like, I think I want to do a wrestling podcast. And I'd be like, yeah, let's do
mm,
it. So, like, for a good, like, almost a year, 8 months or so, you know, he would pepper in like, let's do it, let's do it, let's do it. And I'd be like, yeah, let's do it. You know, so
mm,
finally, I want to say our first episode was right after the CM Punk pipe bomb. It was close to that time frame.
mm,
And that was it. You know, Matt Men was born. There weren't really a lot of fan made wrestling podcasts. So it was
mm.
kind of like us and like a handful of other people. And, you know, it picked up steam, which is really cool. And it's still going and it's awesome. You know, like we've been doing this for like 11, 12 years or something like that. Maybe more. I'm not sure. Um,
14 this year.
right. Yeah. Okay.
I
So there
I
you go.
think. Yeah,
I hope
You said 2011, right?
something like that. Yeah. So maybe
Yeah,
14 years.
yeah. So about 14
And
years this year.
yeah. And, time flies. So, it's fun. It's every Friday morning at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on YouTube. It's a an outlet for both of us, you know, if that
Mm.
makes sense. Like we both kind of get like our kooky stuff off our chest
Oh
and
yeah.
while we get to talk about wrestling, which we love. Um and then I know Andrew does Wrestling Observer. We do Beyond the Bell together. He has another show with Garrett Gonzalez. I think that's called We're Live Pal, but he's
It
never
is, yeah.
invited me on that show, so I wouldn't know anything about it. And you know, we both do like little podcast appearances here and there. But yeah, it's a lot of fun.
How do you brought up Garrett Gonzalez and we're live pal? How do you make sure that your chemistry is different from their chemistry?
Oh, it's I've excuse me, I have no doubt that our chemistry is different. I don't even have to think about it. You know, like I know it immediately. It's like, you know, like this is who we are, and that's it. You know, like you can't replicate it because
No, I understand.
we have a very brotherly connection. You know,
Mm,
and I think like just because like we're in the same neighborhood, you know, I go to the studio, we're face to face instead of over the computer. You know,
mm.
it's a very real and chemical reaction when it happens. You know.
How do you balance then that sort of because something Garrett said in
Hmm.
his podcast was when I had him on the show recently was um so one of the great things he's done with Andrew is to not really speak to him in the week sort of thing because
Yeah.
then he gets excited to do the podcast. So how do you balance having as someone that's known Andrew since you were 13, how do you balance that sort of friendship but then also get excited to do the podcast sort of thing.
I think it kind of goes hand in hand where, you know, like we have several group chats together that, you know, and we don't necessarily talk about wrestling in those, but usually like the day before we'll, we won't set up a skeletons. We have one of our producers, MG Geek, Mr. Gonzo. He'll do notes for us, right? Um,
Mm.
so that's kind of like, it's just like a little, it's not a script, but it's just like a
Bullet points?
guideline of like, I'm sorry.
Bullet points?
Yeah, it's like a guideline. It's bullet points of like what happened during the week, maybe a couple of talking points, etc. So the day before, you like today, for example, today's Thursday. Our show's going to be tomorrow, Friday. Today I'll probably text him around 5 o'clock and be like, "Hey, let's blah 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 blah," and then that's it. You know, it's easy. It's easy peasy. You know, we don't even have to worry about it.
Where, how do I phrase this question? Where do you think you would be there as someone that loves wrestling, is great friends with Andrew and things like that? Where do you think your wrestling fandom would be? And where do you think you'd be as a person if you never met Andrew Zarian?
I'd still be a wrestling fan. I would probably still be a podcaster. I talk a lot. I do have the gift of gab. I have a joke with my wife whenever, if I'm chewing her ear off about something, she will always say, "It sounds like you didn't podcast enough today." So like, there's
Yeah.
always something to talk about. There's always somebody to talk to. And, I'm a fan of production. So I feel like I would still be somewhere in the sphere of wrestling podcasting, but again, who knows?
What does Andrew Zarian mean to you as a co-host and as a friend?
Oh, he's one of my best friends. It's a great relationship. I can't complain about it. It's a lot of fun. That's really the bottom line.
I understand what you're saying completely.
Yeah.
Before we get into the next stage of your podcasting journey
Yeah.
and you two join in Fightful, I'm curious to know where's your current fandom, Rich, as we record this in January of 2025?
Super high. Super high. I feel like it's just like it's one of those things where it's like, oh man, like wrestling has gotten so much better in the last few years, and I think it's the advent of AEW. AEW's been going strong for the last 5 years. WWE has been doing really good stuff. MLW has been doing good stuff. New Japan has been kind of like wobbly, but I wish I had the time to consume everything, but I don't,
Mm.
unfortunately. I'll watch Raw, I'll watch SmackDown, but sometimes on a tape delay, if that makes sense. I'll
Mm.
tune in for AEW. I've been watching more live wrestling now just because like I've gotten better about making my own schedule. But I still miss things. Like I don't really watch TNA, I don't really watch Joshi stuff too much, like a match here and there. And I don't really watch AAA or CMLL. But, my fandom is expansive.
You talked about there making your own schedule and things like that.
Mhm.
How do you make sure then that you spend time with your wife and family and don't become burned out as a creator and podcaster and even a wrestling fan sort of
That's a
thing?
good question. Yeah. I mean, I'm like I said before, I'm very hyper focused when it comes to things I like. So every morning, this is going to be like a roundabout answer. But usually every day, I make a long list of stuff I need to do during the day. And I always, this is what happens when you get older, you have to accommodate for family time, wife time, etc., personal time. I'm very lucky in the regard that my wife is very understanding, and also she has a very different schedule than I do. So usually when wrestling is on, she's not home, and I can enjoy it. Not saying that I would enjoy it while she's home, but like it's definitely one of those me time things where okay, 8 o'clock, she's not home yet. I'm gonna put on Dynamite, for example. I'm gonna put on Dynamite as loud as I can in our apartment and just enjoy it. So yeah, that's where stuff like that's important. I didn't do it this year. This year's the first year I did not watch Wrestle Kingdom as it was airing. And I
Mm.
was like, you know what? I'm sleeping in. I'm treating myself. Sleeping in.
Isn't it on
I'll
really
watch it the
early
next
for you
day.
guys?
Yeah, for us, it starts at like 3 in the morning, and it
Because this
usually
is
ends.
it's the one time of the year that I tweet to all my American friends, and this is with the absolute love, but it's like, now you know how we feel, not to be
Yeah, yeah,
horrible.
I can imagine. I can imagine. So, like, what time is it on for you?
It's
Like,
like 8 a.m. It's
oh, that's
lovely.
amazing.
It's lovely.
Yeah. I wish I could roll out of bed at 7:30, flop, put the TV on and just watch like a pay-per-view.
Oh, it's lovely, man.
Yeah.
It's one of those. And it's the same with the I don't agree with them. Please
Mhm.
don't take this out of context, guys. But it's the same with the Saudi Arabia shows. It's like they're on at 6 p.m. our time. It's lovely. Do you know what I mean?
Oh
We can
yeah,
watch
they're on it.
anything while we're
Like they're on at 1 o'clock here, And like one of the things that we've done in the last few years, if it's a summertime show or like a springtime show, like Andrew and I would just barbecue and have like an iPad outside and just have the show on while we eat and drink, And it's like the perfect time of day. Again, listen, say what you want about those Saudi shows, but I'm saying the timing of the shows is very fantastic on the East Coast.
Thank you. Please listen to Rich. Do not take
Yeah,
that out of context.
yeah,
Anyway,
exactly.
before I go on to a massive rant that I don't need to go on, where does coming joining Fightful for you and Andrew come into it then and creating another show?
Fightful had been trying to pitch us to do a show for a while. At first I believe they wanted to absorb Mad Men, and we were like, nah, maybe we'll do something different. And that's kind of where the idea came about. So it was like a little bit of a process to say, okay, this is what we're going to call it. This is what we're going to do. This is the time that we're suggesting. And then we kind of went from there. And I believe we're about 28, 29 episodes in. And I think we've nailed our flow with that show. The only thing
Mm.
is because it's a Tuesday morning, our time, sometimes we skip it just because of like work or personal
Oh
stuff.
yeah.
Andrew has two kids. I'm a full-time freelancer. So sometimes it's like, hey, I can't do the show. I got X, Y, and Z going on. But it's been fun. The people at Fightful are very sweet.
How do you make that show different then from Mad Men?
Um, Beyond the Bell is definitely the more wrestling fact-oriented show.
Mm.
Not so much of a news program, but it's definitely like a analysis type show, whereas Mad Men is like a little bit nutty most of the time, and Beyond the Bell is us on our, we like to say that Beyond the Bell is us on our best behavior.
Mm. How you talked about being on your best behavior there. I can't imagine you have, because I don't
Mhm.
imagine you'd still be on the air if this was the case. But have you had a conversation, or did you have any conversations with Sean or Jimmy from Fightful that were like, okay, we've seen you do this XYZ on your current show.
Mhm.
Please don't do this on this one, or add this in on this one, etc.
I think the only thing was like, don't curse too much.
Mm,
Like I feel like on Mad Men, not that we do it, but I feel like on Mad Men, we can curse a bit more. Whereas Beyond the Bell, we try to keep it like a little more, we try to reel that stuff back in. Maybe like one F bomb every other episode. But other than that, I think that's really it.
I understand what you're saying completely.
Yeah.
I've realized that's my segue line, and I really struggle to get rid of that. I do
No, no,
apologize.
no. Listen, I like it.
Hmm. So, what do you think? Where was I going with that? So how then do you start doing your comic book podcast? Was this pre any of the wrestling stuff and things like that, or was this
I
during
had
the
a
wrestling
comic book
stuff?
I had a comic book podcast years ago with one of my extremely close friends and one of the original co-hosts of Mad Men, our buddy Jonathan. And then that kind of went away. So during the pandemic, I had nothing, like I was kind of like, what could I do to entertain myself? What could I
Mm,
do that I like? I was like, oh, I want to do another comic book podcast, except this time the goal and the impetus was I want to be able to interview 100 different creators that I like, so that was the original goal. um I've been doing it for about 4 years. It's been like on and off consistent. I think I have maybe like 50 plus episodes. I'm not sure.
mm.
But the whole gist is, I'll talk a little bit about comic books, I'll interview somebody, and then I'll go into like my thoughts, the books of the week that I like, etc. Just like a little bit of rambling here and there. So the episodes are kind of about like 45 minutes to an hour, depending on the conversation that I have. And for 2025, I'm trying to put those out there like once a week. This is like a labor of love kind of thing.
You talked about it being a labor of love there. How do you deal
Yeah.
with burnout as a creator then, Rich, when it comes to, because you cover everything you
Uh,
love, for lack of a
yeah.
better word. You cover wrestling, you cover uh, comic books. So how do you
Mhm.
make sure then that you're still a fan? How do you turn off that reviewer brain when maybe you're sticking dynamite on, but you and Andrew won't talk about it
Yeah.
during the show, or you're reading a comic book, but I've already talked about this one, or I'm not going to talk about this one because there's more that I want to talk about.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think my lack of time during the day saves me from burnout. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Where I don't have enough time to read as much as I want to, and I don't have enough time to watch as much wrestling as I want to. So what I do consume is more precious to me. And I think that helps me avoid the burnout. I feel like if I had all the time I wanted to do this stuff, I would get burned out immediately. Like if I was watching wrestling constantly or reading constantly, I would probably get burned out after a couple of days. But, like I'm a big boy, so like the fact that like I have to set aside these moments to do these things keeps me from getting turned off by them.
mm. I get what you mean.
Yeah.
That's really, really cool. As we look at wrapping this up, because I do want to be respectful of your time, my
I
friend,
appreciate it.
Um, I have a self-indulgent question. You were one
Sure.
of the what I call prototype guests of Tom Talks Rubbish when I first started,
All right.
and we had no format, we had no like put spa, we didn't know what we were doing.
Uh,
Have I improved in our second conversation? What did you enjoy about this? Everything in between.
I think so. I think you've definitely improved. I think, you're showing growth as a creator. I think you're definitely more confident as an interviewer, and I've enjoyed this experience quite thoroughly as I did the first.
I don't know why you enjoyed the first. That was I watched it back the other day. No.
Oh, come on.
I understand what you're saying. I do appreciate that, my friend. But
Yeah,
as we look at wrapping this up, I have two questions for you before we do
sure.
generic questions. Do you view your career in podcasting, Rich, as a success? And what would you want your legacy to be if you did step away?
I don't know how to answer that because what defines success? I don't know what defines success. I feel like as I delve deeper into middle age, I think the question of success varies. Uh, do we have fun podcasting? Absolutely. Do we get to meet a lot of new people, people who like us? And do we get to do a lot of cool things? Absolutely. That could be considered a success. And I thoroughly enjoy that. Um, as far as like a legacy goes, I think the legacy would be the personality that we injected into wrestling podcasting, you know? And I feel like there are folks out there who have large personalities and they do their thing. I feel like we have a chemistry that can't be replicated as far as Mat Men
Because
goes,
you've
you know?
known
So I
each other
think
for so long, man.
Yes, I think that might be like that true legacy where like you can tune into any episode and you'll get hit with like 4 to 5 different jokes and laughs and like, both of us laugh very big. So I think like that happiness and that aura would be a good podcasting legacy if that makes sense.
Oh, totally, my friend.
Yeah.
As we look at wrapping this up, we are going to do a segment that I call generic wrestling questions.
Great.
Those of you that have seen my interviews before, when I ask Ask Rich his favorite match, favorite pay-per-view card, such as Double or Nothing 2019, for example, his
Hmm.
favorite wrestler's entrance theme, favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler. Basically, the questions I assume you're asked Rich on social media or in live stream. So now you'll have a place to be like, guys, I have answered this. Please go watch this. So, what's your favorite match of all time?
The definitive questionnaire. I appreciate that. Favorite match of all time. Again, that's listen. I'm a nutty guy. It'll change every day. But the match that I have been the match that I've been showing to friends who are not wrestling fans lately has been the Kenny Okada match where Kenny wins. That
About
60
four?
minute I think that was for like that 60-minute match where, both guys are spent. It's an hour long, wonderful match. I think that's up there as one of my favorite matches. Another match that I've watched recently that pops into my head a lot. I believe it was Kurt Angle, Shawn Michaels, WrestleMania 19.
21, I believe.
Yeah, and that like whatever their first WrestleMania match was,
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal. I love that match so much. Yeah, I think those two right now.
Why does that Shawn Michaels and Kurt Angle match speak to you so much, my friend?
Because I love both those guys, man. And like it's such a juxtaposition of wrestling style where at that point Kurt Angle was like he was doing the whole like aggressive lunatic thing. And this is the tail end of Shawn Michaels' career. Like if you watch those when Shawn Michaels returned after he got the belt and everything and lost the belt, it was Shawn Michaels having fun.
Mm.
So he had that wacky Hogan match. He had like these big pay-per-view matches, right? But then sometimes it was like, oh, this is serious Shawn Michaels again. And I think we got that like showstopper Shawn Michaels for that match specifically. If you watch him on Raw around that time, he was doing the hokiest, nuttiest stuff. But that match, very serious, very good. All the second half of his career WrestleMania matches, I think were pretty phenomenal. But that one was always a standout to me.
In all fairness, you talk about Shawn Michaels being hokey in that build up. We
Yeah.
did get sexy cut for that build up, to be fair.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Exactly. So like you could do I think he was such a unique entertainer where it's okay to do the silly stuff with him and it's still great because of the match quality.
I think that's the thing as well.
Yeah.
I've heard this comparison on social media and also
Mhm.
on podcasts, but like you know Shawn Michaels was the best in the world. You know Kurt Angle
Absolutely.
could kick your ass in a shoot fight sort of thing
Right.
at that time. So they could get away with doing the hokey stuff, is my thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
What about your favorite pay-per-view, my friend?
Oh, my favorite pay-per-view. That is a great question. Like I said before, I have forgotten so much stuff that I'm sure there's something floating out there. Um, I would say at the top of my head, I think all in 2021. But the
Is that where
reason,
Punk and Danielson?
no, that was, I think it was in
Sorry,
Chicago.
Danielson and Adam Cole, I meant to say.
It may have been. It was the Chicago one, but the standout for me was Lucha Brothers versus the Bucks in that steel
Oh, so
cage.
it was. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, and the only reason I'm saying that again because it's the top of my head, we were there. Like we made a nice trip of it. Like Andrew and his wife went, my wife and I went. We had our producer Mr. Gonzo there. A couple of people that we knew came with us, so we made like that whole weekend a thing. And I think that just for that reason, that is the number one pay-per-view at the top of my head right now.
That's really, really cool. I apologize for interjecting about the pay-per-view. It's just I knew the answer, so I was
No,
just
no,
trying
no,
to
that's
help you.
fine.
That's all.
Listen, like I could be a very forgetful wrestling fan. There's so much content out there.
I understand what you're saying completely.
Yeah.
What about your favorite wrestler's entrance theme?
I would say it's got to be Stone Cold. Like nothing gets me going. Sometimes
This,
Billy Gunn, Billy Gunn's Ass Man theme, Stone Cold's theme. I would say now, like probably still CM Punk's theme. CM Punk's theme now, I think, is the best theme in wrestling. Still,
Disturbed theme, yay or nay for Stone Cold?
nay,
Absolute nay. Not a fan.
absolute, absolute nay. During that era when they had bands doing wrestlers' themes, my favorite one was always Kane. The chemicals, I think it was called the chemicals between us.
Slow chemicals,
Slow
I think.
chemical, yes, that's the one.
That's really, really cool. What about your favorite tag team, Rich?
Favorite tag team, Dudley Boys, without a
Why
doubt.
do they speak to you as a fan?
Oh, they're like tough New York guys, brothers, quote unquote. I like the gimmick. I like the glasses. I always liked how hard hitting they were. I was an ECW fan as a high schooler, so then like seeing them transition to WWE and then going to TNA and going to New Japan and then like all their stuff. Like I think they are the best tag team of all time. Listen, I
That's
know people
really.
are gonna poo poo on that, but for my money, the Dudley Boys are the best tag team of all time.
I love that. I like it.
Yeah.
It's your answer to the generic wrestling questions, my friend. Speaking of which,
Mm.
as we wrap this up, Rich, the biggest generic question, in my opinion, my friend, who is your favorite overall wrestler of all time?
Again, tough question. I've talked about Shawn Michaels a lot, so I'll go Shawn Michaels. I'll go Stone Cold, Eddie Guerrero,
Mm.
Mick Foley. That's the Rushmore I have in my head right now.
Why do they all individually, if we go through your list, why does Shawn Michaels speak to you as a fan?
I feel like his debut as that cocky wrestler will always be cemented in my brain because I watched it, right? I chew gum like a complete asshole, and that's because of Shawn Michaels.
Mm.
I feel like it's one of those characters where you're like much like Stone Cold. It's one of those characters where you were like, "Ooh, I wish I was that guy. I wish I had that guy's confidence. I wish I had X, Y, and Z." Right? Same thing with Austin. Like you wish you could beat up your boss and drink beer and just kick everybody's ass. Right?
Mm.
Eddie Guerrero, just Latin superstar. Love him to death. I think I always thought Eddie was like one of the best wrestlers on the planet. And Mick Foley spoke to me as that angsty high schooler, when he was doing the Mankind stuff and the Cactus Jack stuff. And like, I kind of like, not that I saw myself in that character, but it did comfort me
I know
during
what you
those
mean.
tough adolescent years in junior high and high school.
That's really, really cool, Rich. Obviously, I want to say thank you for a great conversation. Thank you for coming back on the show. But the question I now end this show on is I believe as YouTubers, podcasters, even just people with social media, we're all sort of going to live forever in a very, very strange way, if you think about the word. So, what is one piece of content you're like, Please remember me for that. And then what is one that you're like, nah, you can forget about that if you want to, guys.
I would say forget about the early Mad Men stuff because a lot of it was just like a little slow paced. And listen, remember me from our last episodes, my last episode, whatever the last thing I put out, just remember me for that because, I always try to get better and better and evolve.
That's really, really cool. And a beautiful way to end this, if I'm honest. But as we do, Rich, please promote yourself. Where can the good people find you, your work, etc.?
Oh, fantastic. So you can catch me on the Matt Men podcast YouTube. We do Matt Men every Friday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Andrew and I do Beyond the Bell as well every Tuesday morning at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on YouTube. That's on the Fightful channel. You can see me and catch me on X, formerly Twitter. It's tough to keep that in my brain because I keep calling it Twitter. I'm at BTC Rich. I don't really have any other social media. And if you like comic books and want to check out some interviews, my YouTube channel is BTC Rich X on YouTube, and you can follow me there and come and hang out. I encourage you to subscribe to everything.
It's well worth doing, guys. One of the hardest working people in this space, but one of the nicest as well. So if you guys like this, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter or X, Tom Talks Rubbish, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye now.
Thanks for watching this Tom Talks Rubbish conversation. Before you go, please make sure you leave a like on the video, share it around, and subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish on YouTube, as well as follow Tom Talks Rubbish on Twitter/X.